Today I will be discussing the rise and fall of the camper, as we called it. The camper, or sometimes we would add the person living in its name to it, like Jack's Camper. It was a Camp King coach made by the McName Coach Corporation from El Monte, California. They made many innovative campers. Merle McName, who the company was named after, designed and was first to use the foam sandwich panels in any RV. The foam sandwich panel was basically they took two pieces of paneling and sandwiched it between a piece of foam instead of using the crappy insulation that a lot of them used at the time. He's also credited with developing camper jacks to make easy work of loading and unloading campers. He was inducted into the RV Hall of Fame in 1992. We should be inducted into the RV Hall of Shame after what we did to one of these beautiful creations. Come along as I lay out the path this camper took once it came to the property, as well as set stage for a few other videos. I believe it was late 2014 or early 2015 when this Camp King and Old Yeller were pulled into the driveway. It was towed about 30 miles from a town named Paulsbo. It didn't run because it had had an engine fire, and then it sat near salt water and was lived in for a time. The salt air rusted the parts that had burned, including the firewall in the engine compartment. The camper had a leak and needed a tarp at all times. Plus side was it had a title. My son made the deal on this one originally, as we will see later that is a habit of his. He had moved out of the house to go live with his girlfriend. Circumstances led him to come back home. This time he was a +1. Also, his room was now occupied by someone else, so the two were sleeping in the living room. He found this online and jumped on it. It made a nice home for them for a few months. When he lived in it, it was parked out front on the concrete where my carport tent is now. His interest went to another RV, but that is a future video. We made a deal, and I can't remember the details how I ended up getting it. I was going to take the camper off of the 1973 Chevy C20 Camper Special Body and put it onto a 1985 GMC 2500 four-door that I had. My plan was to take the bench seats out, put 4 buckets in the truck, and then cut a passage to the camper so I could pass through. Seal it all up good, of course. I set to work removing the bathroom because it didn't fit my plan, as well as the water tank because it was in the way of the entrance to the cab of the truck. I cleaned it up pretty nice inside and even made some curtains for it. There was a little rot by the door that I would take care of at some point. The 1973 C20 was going to be used to fix up my old 75 K20 truck. It was beat when it was little and not by me. I did put the parts on it and had it all fixed up just in time for the transmission to go out, which just so happened to be the problem with the 85 four-door also, just a few years apart. My project was in full swing when I bought a 1976 Mini Winnie, also for another video. I abandoned the project, sold the 85 GMC, and tore out what I needed off the 73. I took out the small block V8, pulled the heads, and one cylinder was full of water, so I sold the engine and transmission. I made some attempt at selling the camper, but no one wanted to take it off, and neither did I. A friend needed a place to stay, so I pushed it off the concrete into a spot we will call by the cabin. This friend was living here with his wife and son in what we called the fifth wheel. After my son moved out of it, they had a falling out, so I let him move into the camper. He lived there for a couple years. When he left, it was immediately filled by another friend's sister and son who were on the couch beforehand. They lived in it for a year or two. Over the years, the tarp on top got old. Other things were put on it to try to keep it dry, but at some point that all failed. The old Camp King had sheltered its last people. It was time for it to go. friend's sister and son moved out, and it sat for a couple months. It was time to put it out of its misery. What had been a good invention by McName now was slowing the destruction. The glued foam board construction was still holding well, despite most of the support wood was deteriorated. It was also glued to the aluminum, which made scraping it harder. One load to the dump and one to the scrapyard, and a legacy was gone. Now the 73 Chevy needed to be dealt with. We cut the cab up, then removed the cab bolts and pulled the rest of the cab off. We cut the front suspension off and cut the frame back just far enough so the bed could be made into a trailer. The bed has no rust in it. It looks like the day it was made, so I'm going to clean it up and try to sell the bed. Then if the bed does sell, I'll make a flatbed with the camper special axle. But until it sells, I will just use it as a trailer. I towed it around back with my Ford Explorer without knowing the wheel was locked up. You can find that video here on the channel. Gone but not forgotten, the camper. It will live on in our memories, and you will see it in a few videos if you pay close attention.